Hey everybody. This week we are going to focus on texture. Texture. It's how things feel, right? Or how they look like they feel. Something could be hairy, soft. Something could be wrinkly and rubbery, right? But you're talking about how things feel. We're going to experiment with it when you create some sort of landscape that you like, right? And a landscape is an outside place, some sort of outside place. So you're going to put both of them together. And in this video, I am going to share with you 3 possible ways that you can combine those elements together. One of them is to create what's called a collagraph, layered cardboard, and then you do a rubbing of it, right? We've experimented with that with texture plates, plastic plates in various grades at Zamorano. Another option is to create a photograph using like plastic bags, shopping bags, in order to create your textured landscape. And the final one is using a digital app called Drawing with Carl. And it has a couple great texture features that I will share with you as well. So check out the video. After you watch the video, think about which texture process that you would like to experiment with. Think about, brainstorm, write it down, a few options for landscapes that you'd like to try. Gather your materials, right? Go ahead and create your artwork or artworks and document it. Submit it to Seesaw or Google Classroom, and then make sure you clean up after yourself. So check out the video and shine bright. So the first option is to create a collagraph, basically a relief plate out of cardboard or board materials. So you can see I've gathered some thinner cardboard and some thicker cardboard. I've got my scissors and glue in order to hold the cut pieces together. Choose a piece for your base plate, right? So I'm going to trim up the sides of this, so I'll be left with a square. And think about, well, hopefully you already have thought about what kind of landscape you're going to create. I'm kind of doing a kind of desert, kind of plateau canyon scene with this one. So I'm cutting out a few jagged shapes. And once you do it, you could use this piece horizontally, or I could rotate it vertically. That's up to you, depending on your plan. As you're cutting, you may find that the negative shapes, or the leftover parts, are interesting to use too. So don't throw those away right away. Think about how you might be able to add them to your landscape creation. As you are planning your landscape, I would challenge you to create at least 3 layers of space: foreground, middle ground, and background. And as you're cutting these pieces out, don't glue them down right away, because you might want to change the order, or you might want to change shape. So save the gluing until you're sure you've got everything just the way you want it. So I added a sun shape that I cut, and you can also experiment with torn edges too. You could see where for my clouds, I actually tore to create the top, so it gives it kind of a more natural feel, and it's a nice contrast against the jagged cuts of my mountain range. Once you have everything in position, then you shall glue. And when you glue, I would start with the background. Start with the stuff that is all the way in the back, and you're going to layer as you go. So you don't have to tuck things in awkwardly if you glue something down first. You can also peel, if you're using thicker cardboard, you can peel back that thin layer to reveal a textured, kind of like a rib texture right there that could be really interesting, especially like in the foreground, in the front of a landscape, since it has more detail than some of the other parts. Once your collagraph plate is all glued together, let it sit for a few minutes, maybe 15-20 minutes, for the glue to dry a little bit. Even if you're using glue sticks and not liquid glue, you can see there's another landscape that I created, kind of like a cave, and I used I peeled back the paper so you can really see that bumpy texture in the foreground because I wanted it to be darker. Then what you want to do is get some crayons, possibly tape. If you don't have tape, that's okay, but it does keep the paper in place a little better. So you want to gather your materials so you can make your rubbings. So here I have flipped over my plate so the front is on the paper, and I'm using this little tab of Scotch tape to hold the two together so it doesn't slip and slide, and the print, the rubbing that I'm going to make will be a little bit more accurate and less frustrating because it should line up after different colors. Now, when it comes to adding color to your Collagraph rubbing, I suggest using at least two colors. If you want to use one color, that's fine. But you're going to go ahead, hold the paper steady over the Collagraph plate. You're going to rub it as you go, and you'll be able to see the edges. Make sure you go all the way to the edges of your plate. And I like to start with a lighter color and then move on to darker colors for the middle ground and foreground. Once I finish with the first color, then I move on to a second color, and I have not lifted my paper up. If you do that, it's going to be really challenging to line things back up accurately. So I'm using a red over the orange to add a little bit more color detail, a little bit more value to my Collagraph landscape. So with this one, you could see that I went over it with brown as well in the foreground there. And those textured pieces, the thick cardboard that I peeled, you can see how that adds a nice element of detail to the foreground. Now, the cool thing about this, which I have not done, is that once you have the plate made, you can make multiple copies of it, right? You just put down another piece of paper, make a rubbing. So if you want to experiment with different color combinations, you can totally do that, right? And that's one of the really neat things about printmaking is that once you have the plate, you can use it in a variety of ways to come up with different visuals that have the same basic information, but the colors are different. Here is the finished, or shall I say, almost finished version of the other landscape I made. After I made this one, I wasn't quite feeling the kind of like the cave structure there with the rough cardboard. So what I did is I got a Lego plate and I removed the paper from the Collagraph plate now, the cardboard, and I slid the Lego plate under in a few areas to add a little bit more texture to that foreground. Here you can see what it's starting to look like. So I'm splitting that cave structure really up into two separate parts. So the Lego part is going to look like it's closer because it's going to be even darker. And this is the finished version. So you can see how it breaks up that negative shape of the cave a little bit more. I'm more satisfied with this one. The next optional approach, or the next option, is inspired by the photographs of Vilde Rolfsen. And she is a Norwegian from Norway photographer who uses plastic bags to create these very highly textured landscapes in her photo studio. All right, so this is an option for you if you have shopping bags or envelopes or different materials that you can kind of wrinkle up in different ways and photograph from the inside. Here's one that I did. So I took a grocery bag, kind of balled it up, twisted it up, experimented with it, kind of held it tighter on the left there, and I held it up to a window so I have some light shining through. And you could see by doing that, and then I positioned the camera at the opening of the bag. So you have some darker shapes in the front, medium in the middle, and then that really bright spot in the back on the left there. So it creates a landscape of foreground, middle ground, and background, and it creates kind of like this cool Arctic kind of cavern. All right, so I encourage you to experiment with different materials, different light sources, and possibly different things on the outside. Here's another one that I did using a packing envelope. So it's a little bubble wrap on the inside. That's why you see that texture there. And again, holding it up to afternoon light. And since the bag or the envelope is yellow, it gives us a different feel. This one is more of like a desert canyon. Right? So you can really experiment with something that's more abstract like this, but it's still going to give you that landscape feeling. And here's another one that I did where I used a green shopping bag, and you can see I put a little bit of graph paper in there. I kind of balled it up. And again, when you're looking at this, you still have, even though it's more abstract, you've got your darker, medium, and lights in there to create that sense of depth. And there's a whole lot of texture in here, wrinkly texture that's implied by the surface of the bag and the light. The final option I'd like to share is a digital one, and it's with an app that is called Drawing with Carl. And it is a low-cost app. It's $2, but it is available for Android and iOS for Apple products. And it's a fun drawing tool that has a lot of nice options that you can experiment with. One in particular is a paint roller tool, which will allow you to create fills, large areas or small areas of pattern or texture, kind of invented texture this time. So on this photo, you could see various textures or patterns that you could use. And they have a spray paint tool, they have a stamp tool, they have a paintbrush tool. They've got a lot of tools to experiment with that are going to give you different feels or different textures in a landscape if you choose to use it. And then you could take a screenshot of it, or you can save it when you're done so you could share it with me. Quick example of, so I drew an outline of a shape, and once I did that, since I was using the paint roller, right, the pattern, it fills it with that. And I did that several more times, changing the pattern or the texture each time. So you could see it has overlapping in there, and it has a sense of space. Big, medium, and small, and then different patterns so they are clear and understandable. And here is my finished landscape that I created with Drawing with Carl. So again, when I did this, I started with the background. I used a large paintbrush to create kind of the light green hill. I used the crayon tool to create the light green tree, and then I switched to darker green colors, and I went back to that paintbrush. And then in the foreground there, I experimented with the paint rollers and the patterns. And I changed the colors one more time so it reads dark, medium, and light. And then I used the spray paint tool up in the sky at the end to add the sky color and the clouds. I used the crayon tools and the eraser, right? So a lot of flexibility with this tool. And if you don't like a step that you do, there's an undo button. So if you have this as an option, it's definitely worth experimenting with too. Ooh, added bonus content. With the Pixlr app, what I did here is I took my Collagraph, my desert Collagraph, and I added it to Pixlr, and then I chose the negative option. I reversed the colors. So instead of it being warm and light, now it is cool and dark. So I have a day version and a night version of the same scene. So with Collagraphs, you can experiment with different colors by creating different rubbings. But if you have this app available and it's free on desktop, it's free on multiple platforms, you can alter the color that way too. So just another way that you can experiment with texture and landscape. So there you go. 4 ways with the Pixlr method. 4 ways to incorporate texture and landscape into your artwork this week. Remember, once you are done creating your work, document it. Make sure if you're taking a photograph, you get it from a really nice angle, straight ahead. And then make sure you share your work correctly to Google Classroom or Seesaw. So if you have any questions, please reach out to me. And Good luck and shine bright.